which is always just on the mark. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. May I repeat a story? I guess so. I didn't hear any objection. But I'm sure that you're also saying, sure, we all repeat stories. And then I ask myself the question, will you remember? So as we get older, we tend to repeat ourselves more. It seems to be part of natural aging processes. Perhaps it's a reflection on our own limitations. On the other hand, we know that repetition is really good for emphasis and for learning. I also think that all of us throughout our lives have experienced certain moments. We've received certain teaching. We've heard certain bits of advice. And those things play over and over and over again in our heads. So I've had a few such experiences, but one that's always stayed with me in terms of my work as a teacher of Judaism, of Judaic, of Torah. And I've never forget it. It's so vivid. It's had a profound impact on my life as a rabbi and a teacher. And so I'm going to tell it to you again now. And some of you have heard it perhaps a few times. And you'll see why I chose to do this week, the week as we make this great transition in the Torah reading in Parshat Trumah. The event that I described took place at the Beit Midrash at the Shalom Hartman Institute one summer, about, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. A lecture was being given by one of Rabbi David Hartman, Zichrono Livracha's preeminent students, someone who has become quite well known as a teacher of Torah, a respected lecturer, and also an author. It happened to have been the last summer that Rabbi Hartman was with the 200 or so rabbis who came to his institute. It was the last summer before he died. And this may be one of only a few lectures that he went to that summer. I think he only came to 2 that summer. I want you to picture the scene. 200 rabbis from North America who studied together for 2 weeks or a month. And they were gathered to hear this lecture. And the lecture began, and after a few minutes into the lecturer was interrupted by Hartman, who was sitting in the first row, and he yelled out, "Micha, what difference does it make?" The room was silent, and the lecturer continued, and then Hartman interrupted him a second time and said, "What difference does it make?" The lecturer looked towards his rabbi, and he said, "Rabbi, 1 minute. Give me 1 minute. I'll get to the point." And then he continued and was interrupted again. "Micha," he extolled his student, "if your Torah doesn't make a difference in the lives of real people, if it doesn't make sense in the real lives which are lived by our people, then it's not a good Torah." And the room was silent. Micha continued his lecture, not as he planned to give it, but he went to his conclusions, which really did make a connection between the text and life. All of us who were there were astounded by the exchange. We were all very impressed by the young lecturer because he retained his composure in the face of this great rabbi, and he showed him the utmost respect. And when he finished the lecture, his teacher then said to him, "Now I understand. And you did a great job. And your teaching does make a difference." And I'm sure for every rabbi who sat in that room, that was a memorable moment, and it had to have impacted all of us on how we teach Torah, the sermons that we give, the words which we speak. I bring it up today, as I mentioned, because I believe
Please bear with us. I'm not sure if the rabbi's screen is frozen. You might have to come back in. After, do you want to sing a song?
I think he will have to restart probably.
Yeah,
We should wait a few seconds.
yeah, he logged off.
I want to say talk among yourselves.
Right.
And then um I think there are many issues with the internet in the area
Right,
today, right?
right.
I'm definitely not doing the sermon for sure. Just saying. Maybe I can sing the sermon in song.
Right, he's coming back right now. 1 second.
I'm getting requests of songs in the private chat.
Okay, Rabbi Steinhardt just logged back in.
Yes.
I'm back.
Okay, great.
Hopefully it will be stable.
Rabbi, I was about to deliver the sermon, you know?
I was here to hum this Musaf. Now, where did I leave off? Yeah. So I hope you're with me. Yeah. You know. So as I said, I bring this up because I believe for myself anyway, that Torah and our religious life, the life of the community has to make a difference. And that is why when there are major events around us, they have to be spoken about in the context of our tradition, because our tradition does speak to the world. And that is why we need to parse out meaning from ancient texts. It's often symbolic and mythic and metaphoric, but we have to understand that we inherited a text in order to keep alive a particular perspective on the world, that our texts have to be values driven. The text we study and the text we read have to make a difference. Maybe during the years of our existence, when we were living in very closed communities and when we studied in yeshivot, there was not a back and forth with the larger world at all. We could immerse ourselves in our learning and our prayer and pretend that we were back during the time of Rabbi Akiva and Hillel and Shammai, or that we were living during the times of temple sacrifices. And that might have been our people fulfillment. But it doesn't today. Only as an academic, question, an academic connection. In fact, unless we wish to cut ourselves off from the world, the tradition will be lost for so many in future generations. Simply put, our kids, your kids who are highly educated in the best of Western thought, won't attach to it. And yet there's so much that is connected and so much that we're obligated to make the connections with. It's something I feel strongly about. There are observances and rituals and practices from the past that we need to keep in order to keep Jewish life alive. And frankly, I believe even all of those are so essential that we have to find the interpretive meanings in them. And they do make sense in our world, whether it's the way we eat and what we eat, or the way we relate to the passage of time and how we sanctify time. The most basic religious practices called to this world today, we need to be able to preserve them with the meaning that they can be given. We always have to answer them. What difference does it make? What difference does it make that we observe Shabbat, that we pray together? It does. It makes a big difference. So this week we read a parsha on the Torah, the earth-shattering events of being enslaved and being redeemed and experiencing miracles and a revelation. And now we begin the reading of a section that has to do with the building of a tabernacle in the wilderness, the very specific aspects of that building. It reads like a blueprint. It's followed by responsibilities for the priests, even how they dress, and the sacrifices from a system that is long gone. So what do we do with it? What difference does it make? There's some of you who study in a class with me, and we know that's a question we've been asking about the sacrifices and actually uncovering meaning for our lives today. We find that our tradition and its commentaries over centuries had the capacity to create meaning for their time, to find the metaphors and the symbolism, and to allow it to continue to speak. But sometimes it's just not the case. By the way, this creates great angst for me when I think about our children in our Sunday school and our Hebrew school. It creates great angst for me when I think about our bar and bat mitzvah students who are preparing to give speeches from texts which they don't see any relation to at all. They seem so distant from their real experiences, so far away from the meaning that they have in their own lives. And so it places a great responsibility and a great burden on our teachers and on our rabbis, our educational system. In our training of our teachers from the Hebrew school, I meet with them in the beginning of the year, and I'll always say to them, if you don't believe it, then don't teach it. But if you don't believe it, think about what it means and then teach it for its meaning. I'll tell you that we are up to the task. I certainly am. We have to make this meaningful. We have to be able to parse out meaning so that kids don't turn away from it and say it's nothing but baba mices without meaning. We have myth and we have history, and it all contains meaning. There's something in it. We have to be able to articulate it, and that's the challenge in our learning. So let me share with you three incredible ideas, three verses that are found in Trumah. In Trumah, this parsha that has to do with building a mishkan in the wilderness, building a tabernacle in the wilderness, perhaps thousands of years ago, for sure, over 3,500 years ago. The first one is this. The first is Vayikhuli Trumah. It comes in the very beginning. It literally means, and they should take for me gifts. They should take for me gifts. I learned something really beautiful because it's translated as, and they should bring gifts to me. They should give me gifts in order to do this building project. But years and years ago, I learned from Rabbi Reamer the following. It has to do with the construction of the central institutions of religious life. And it's saying, it's not enough that you give. Then it would say, Vayitnuli Trumah. But that people who are really devoted to the project, people who are really committed to the building of the community, have to be willing, Vayikhuli Trumah. They have to be willing to take gifts for me. What that means is that if you're commanded not only to be a generous giver, but you're also commanded to be a solicitor of funds. You have to solicit for the cause. And so then we're all part of the effort. It's beautiful because it's saying that it's not enough that you're committed to something privately. You have to convince other people around you to get involved and to share your commitment to what's important. What a beautiful idea. The second pasuk, which we hear frequently and more frequently now because Cantor Fishman sings it so beautifully. V'yasuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. They shall make for me a mikdash, a holy place, and I will reside b'tocham. And so the literal meaning is that when they build this mishkan, kind of like the joke that's on the internet with the Chabad house on Mars, it'll be in the center of the place where people land, where people will be. And it'll be a place for God to reside. And by doing so, it will tie all the people together to a central institution. But there's another idea, and the other idea is what we strive for. We're striving for it right now. By creating a holy space, a holy place, a sanctuary, we're creating not just a place for God to dwell, but rather a reminder that God dwells within us as individuals. That place is meant to inspire ourselves, not just when you walk into it, but you bring it with you when you leave it. So the experience of God in prayer in the sanctuary is a shared experience, but it's meant to inspire the presence of holiness inside of you as an individual. How beautiful. And isn't that part of the purpose of communal religious expression? And that is not just to tie us together, but to touch your heart, the heart of every one of you as an individual. There's always a balance to be made between what we do as a community and what we feel as individuals. And then there's a third verse here that has always touched me, and it's contained in the following verse. V'tzipiti oto zahav tahor mibayatu michutz. And that says, when building that ark, you should overlay its construction with pure gold inside and outside. And so the question is, why put the gold inside where no one sees it? So on one hand, we have a blueprint for building architecture and design, but on the other hand, that blueprint for building is making a statement. And that is that which you build should be beautiful at its core. It should be beautiful inside also. Religious life is not just something that we do externally. Religious life is not just about the material, for sure. It's not just about the sanctuaries we build, but it's about the souls that we create, the spirits we move. The real religious life is the life that sees a dimension which says it's not just about the ritual, but it's about how the ritual touches you, how the ritual can change you, how the ritual can make you beautiful. And it makes a difference. Hartman was right. It has to make a difference. On our bima, there's a sign on the podium where your clergy stand that stretches across that contains a quote from the book of Psalms. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I set the Lord before me always. It's there as a reminder to all of us who lead services. It's a constant reminder to keep our heads and our hearts in the right place. You see, and you can imagine what it's like when you stand in front of hundreds of people, when you stand in front of 1,000 people, whether you're speaking or whether you're singing, there's a tendency to think about, how's this performance going? But it's not to be that. It's not about the place of an ego. Being in the place of your ego is the worst place possible to be when you pray. We're reminded that what we show externally must be a part of what we feel internally. And for all of you who sit in the congregation, you know the words that are found above the Aron Kodesh. I don't think I have it in my background picture, but the words, you know, are Dalifnei Miata Omed. So we come together, we sing together, we share and joy together, we shake hands, we hug each other during the good days, right? But we should know who we're standing before. So I want to return for a moment to Vayikhuli Truma. Tell the people to bring me an offering, or to give me an offering, or to take for me an offering. Rashi commented that the word li implies li lishmi. And that is, the offering has to be given with pure intentions for the sake of God. For one might think that donating to the construction was a sign of piety. But Rashi's saying something different. It is possible to show external piety while lacking true piety internally. It's possible to appear to be religious, to show all the outward signs of a religious person, but not conduct oneself with a religious heart and with a religious mind. In the Kabbalah, there's a teaching that says we come closest to God when we give. And that's the essence of the whole system of sacrifice. It's of giving of ourselves. So whether we give something, charity, or we give love, or we give kindness, or we give our time, a truly religious person is characterized by an overwhelming desire to share what they have and who they are, to act selflessly with purity of heart with others. This is the essence of true religion. The mystics believe that we become more distant from God when we take. So trying to amass as much as possible for ourselves, trying to gain more and more material goods, trying to gain more honor, more satisfaction for our egos, brings us farther from God. We cannot exist without the power of taking, since we have to fulfill basic material needs. But when that power is exerted too much, we move away from God. Perhaps the most powerful moments in my rabbinate are, sadly, when I sit with families before the funerals of loved ones. In a community like this, often it's with families that I don't know very well because of the size of our communities and because none of us who are over the age of, let's say, 45 grew up here. So we don't have that kind of history together. But I sit with all families, and I sit with the families where the survivors have been part of our community for a long time or have just arrived in our community. And when I hear the following words, Rabbi, my father was the kindest and most generous person in the world. And I heard those words this week from a family. And they said, no, we're not exaggerating. This isn't hyperbole, they said. Our dad was the kindest man in the world. I felt at that moment that I would have to prepare a eulogy for the most religious person in the world. A person who gives with an open heart, generously and lovingly, is a person of great spirit. Those gifts could be measured in the time they give, in the money they give, but mostly in their kindness. There we find, according to the mystics, the manifestation of God. In the Parsha, we learn that when the call went out to the people, they began to give and give and give until Moses said to them, "Speak, it's enough. You've given enough." You know, I've seen that here also. And I'll tell you, and I'll share with you with that which many of you know. We have this program called TLC, which stands for Tzedakah, Limud, and Chesed. Some like to say tender, loving care. I think it's both. And it serves underserved populations throughout this community and this nation. People who need the basic essentials like food and clothing and even showers. And I've seen here something so heartwarming and something so deeply religious, Judaism expressed at its best. Because without fundraising, people call and they say, how do I give? What can I do? How can I help? How can I volunteer? You know, as long as we live in this world, we know there will always be poor amongst us. The needs will always be present. But the giving hearts see that we can make a difference. And since the needs are so great, we'll always continue to do this work, to grow this particular program, but also understand it's a manifestation of what it means to be a shul, a synagogue. So let me conclude. This section, Truma, comes from a distant past. It seems so very far away from our lives. It takes a little bit of work to be able to say, what difference does it make? It does. It teaches us to give and contribute to our people and our institutions, to our synagogue and to our society, and to do so with a pure heart, to do so selflessly, and to do so with humility. That's the deeper aspiration of authentic religious living. And this is the essence of building a life of meaning, being a member of a family, a friend, and a part of religious community. I am committed to always try to answer the question, what difference does this make? And I think all of us should do the same. And then we can truly say that we have a synagogue of meaning, mibayit to michutz, both outwards and inwards. Shabbat shalom, everybody. We'll continue with the Musaf service, page 155. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, yasher koach, Rabbi. יתגדל ויתקדש שם רבה, בעלמא דברי קירותי וימליך מלכותי.